Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the hushed, perfumed night of a Mughal court. The moonlight filters through latticed marble screens, shadows pool beneath carpets embroidered with gold thread, and the air carries both rosewater and apprehension. You're not here just to admire peacock thrones or jeweled arches. You're here to watch what happens when justice flexes its muscles in ways that feel, well, odd. One whisper in the wrong corridor, and you might find yourself paraded on a donkey, or bowing under the gaze of an imperial elephant. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive a day as an offender under the Mughal emperors, not because every punishment was brutal, but because so many were unpredictable, humiliating, or designed to squeeze your pride until it squeaked. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love it if you dropped a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fun to see the mix of night owls and early birds in this little sleepy community. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the polished stone of the Diwanikas, the hall of private audience. The silver lamps flicker low, throwing elongated shadows of courtiers standing stiff as chess pieces. Some whisper nervously, others smirk, but all eyes dart toward the peacock throne where the emperor might appear at any moment. You sense tension. Someone has been summoned, and when Mughal justice stirs, no one knows whether mercy or spectacle will follow. Fact: the Mughal Empire at its height stretched across most of the Indian subcontinent, a patchwork of faiths and cultures stitched together under emperors like Akbar, Jahangir, and Shah Jahan. Justice was a cornerstone of their rule, a visible stage where the emperor proved himself more than monarch. He was the arbiter of cosmic order. And in that role, punishments were never just about the individual. They were lessons scripted for the entire court, sometimes for the entire city. A quirky detail: the courts often held sessions well into the night. Moonlight streaming through pierced screens, flames flickering in brass lamps, and sleepy clerks scratching records in Persian ink. It gave the entire affair a dreamlike, sometimes surreal mood. Imagine nodding off during testimony and waking just as a man is sentenced to ride a donkey backward through the bazaar. That's one way to cure drowsiness. Historians still argue whether the Mughal emperors preferred mercy or severity. Some chronicles paint Akbar as a philosopher king, turning punishment into reform. Others accuse Aurangzeb of harshness that chilled even hardened courtiers. The truth may lie in the spectacle itself. Justice had to be seen, and whether light or heavy-handed, it was always memorable. You glance at the crowd. Merchants tug their beards nervously. Poets hide half-smiles behind their ink-stained fingers. An elephant handler, barefoot and broad-shouldered, lurks in the corner, waiting in case the emperor wants justice on a grander, tusk-laden scale. Even the parrots in their gilded cages seem to hush, as though they too know tonight's tale will be worth retelling. A guard marches past, his spear clinking, his turban dyed in deep indigo. He smells faintly of sweat and cardamom. Behind him, two servants carry trays of rosewater, splashing them lightly over the carpet to freshen the air. You cough softly, the perfume almost smothers you. Mughal courts loved abundance, but abundance often tipped into excess, and you wonder whether offenders ever fainted from sheer sensory overload before hearing their sentence. The accused enters. He is small, nervous, clutching the edge of his sash. He bows so low his turban nearly slips. The hush deepens, broken only by the faint ringing of anklets as a noblewoman shifts behind a screen. You watch as the emperor raises a jeweled hand, a single gesture freezing the hall. This is the theater of power, punishment as performance, where even a raised eyebrow can change a man's fate. One joke hums at the back of your thoughts: forget Netflix. Mughal Court at Midnight was the original binge-watch series. You smirk quietly, though you know you'd never dare laugh aloud here. You breathe in slowly, tasting rosewater and tension. The emperor's eyes glitter, unreadable. Around you, courtiers lean closer, each bracing for the reveal. And you, crouched near the pillars, realize that tonight you've stepped into a world where justice is scented, gilded and occasionally bizarre. The emperor lowers his jeweled hand, and the murmurs start again, weaving through the marble hall like restless birds. You edge closer, careful not to step on the silk hem of a noble's robe. Tonight's tension is not only about guilt or innocence, it's about how the law itself is going to be performed. Because in the Mughal world, law wasn't a dry code buried in books. It was a living negotiation between jurists, emperors, and custom, each pulling threads to weave a judgment both legal and theatrical. Fact: the Mughal judicial system blended three main elements: Islamic Sharia law, imperial edicts known as zawabit, and layers of local customs. Judges or qazis presided over courts in towns and cities, hearing disputes about theft, property, marriage, and more. But when cases touched on prestige, politics, or high-profile crime, they floated upward, sometimes landing in the emperor's lap. In that space, the verdict was less about precedent and more about imperial image. You listen as a qazi, turban slightly askew, begins to read charges in a sonorous Persian tone. The hall fills with words that tumble over one another, like script from an illuminated manuscript. Theft, insult, breach of duty, all painted in grand strokes. The man accused keeps his gaze down, his hands trembling as though he's holding on to invisible reins. Quirky detail. Mughal emperors were famous for inserting their own flair into judicial rituals. Akbar, for instance, liked to consult a mix of Muslim clerics, Hindu pandits, and Jesuit missionaries, just to show how wide his net was. Imagine sitting in a room where a priest, a monk, and a Brahmin argue about how to punish you for breaking a curfew. That's not a joke setup. It was actual imperial policy. Historians still argue whether these mashups of legal sources created fairness or confusion. Some praise Akbar's sul-ikul, universal peace policy, claiming it opened space for multiple voices. Others note that the emperor's word always trumped debate anyway, making law a velvet glove over an iron fist. You wonder how it felt to stand trial knowing your fate might hinge on whether the emperor had indigestion that evening. Courtier clears his throat and suggests a punishment, grounded in zawabit, imperial. Regulations meant to handle practical gaps. Unlike divine law, these edicts dealt with the nitty-gritty: markets, taxes, military discipline. You picture a clerk hunched over his desk, drafting decrees about how many lashes a soldier gets for sleeping on watch, or how many coins a merchant owes for watering down milk. Dry words on parchment, yes, but in this hall those dry words could be transformed into public theatre. The qazi pauses, waiting for imperial approval. You notice the emperor's ring catching the lamplight, ruby glowing like an ember. He leans forward, whispers to a vizier. The vizier nods, then announces a decision. The offender will not be flogged. Too messy for tonight's refined atmosphere. Instead, he will be paraded tomorrow in the bazaar, mounted backward on a donkey, his face smeared with soot. The crowd reacts with polite laughter. This is not just law. It is lesson, entertainment, and deterrent. You realize the emperor has chosen a punishment that preserves order without spilling blood, one that the city will gossip about for weeks. One joke curls in your mind. Forget fines and parking tickets. How about riding a donkey backward through downtown? You stifle a chuckle, imagining modern streets with office workers sentenced to awkward parades. The qazi scribbles notes with his reed pen, ink blotching slightly on the parchment. You see his hands shaking, perhaps from age, perhaps from fear of error. A wrong word, an unclear sentence, and the emperor might turn irritation into punishment for him too. The law here is as fragile as the reed he writes with. The accused bows low, relief mixed with humiliation. He has escaped harsher penalties, but tomorrow he will wear shame like a robe. The emperor waves his hand again and the hall exhales. Another case, another odd twist of justice that balances legal logic. Imperial whim, and the desire to remind everyone watching that the throne is both merciful and merciless. You leave the hall with the image stamped into your mind. Justice in the Mughal Empire is not a set of scales hidden in dusty chambers. It's a performance. A script where everyone, from qazi to accused, plays their part under the emperor's watchful eyes. The following morning you shuffle into the bazaar, the air alive with frying sweets, clinking copper vessels, and the sing-song cries of merchants hawking indigo cloth and saffron threads. Yet everyone's attention is pulled in one direction, today's punishment parade. You weave through the crowd, sandals scuffing dust, and there it is, a donkey, stubborn ears twitching, its rider perched awkwardly backward. Fact: public shaming was one of the most common Mughal punishments for petty offences. Thieves, fraudsters, corrupt officials, even students who cheated on their exams could be sentenced to humiliating processions. They might be forced to ride donkeys backward, wear women's veils, or have soot smeared across their faces. This wasn't just cruelty. It was intended as a moral lesson for the community. By watching, you were meant to think twice before making the same mistake. The offender clings to the donkey's rump, his turban missing, hair sticking out like straw. His cheeks are blackened with soot, eyes watering as children run alongside chanting rhymes. Some toss flower petals in mock celebration, others jeer. Merchants chuckle behind their stalls, but you notice them gripping their scales a little tighter. Laughter hides unease. Anyone could be next. A quirky tidbit, sometimes offenders were dressed in ridiculous costumes. Chronicles describe men caught gossiping too freely, being forced to wear women's bangles and veils. Paraded while drummers beat out mocking rhythms. Imagine being sentenced to cosplay against your will, with the entire city as your audience. One noble complained afterward that he feared humiliation more than flogging. Historians still argue whether these shaming rituals were effective deterrents or merely popular entertainment. Some sources claim crime rates dipped after high-profile parades. Others suggest the punishments hardened resentment, creating folk heroes out of humiliated men. It's a puzzle. Did the donkey break crime or simply provide the crowd a day's comedy? You push forward, watching as the parade snakes through spice stalls and weaving workshops. Women peer from latticed balconies, whispering behind hands. The offender's blackened face gleams under the sun, sweat streaking the soot into rivers. He grips the donkey tighter as it brays, clearly enjoying its role as co-star. One joke springs to mind. This donkey deserves an acting award, most convincing partner in a courtroom drama. As the procession moves on, you notice the emperor's guards scattered through the crowd. Their stern faces remind everyone that this isn't just fun. This is sanctioned, scripted justice. The laughter is permitted, but dissent is not. A man mutters too loudly about unfairness, and a guard's glance silences him instantly. The donkey halts suddenly near a sweet seller's stall, refusing to move. The rider sways dangerously, nearly toppling off. Children erupt in laughter, merchants clap, and for a moment the punishment slips into slapstick theatre. Yet the symbolism is clear. Dignity can be lost in an instant, toppled by stubborn animals or imperial decree. You catch the eye of a scribe trailing the parade, scribbling notes. His reed pen scratches on folded paper, recording every stumble. Tomorrow these details will flow into chronicles, turning humiliation into history. You wonder whether the man on the donkey realizes he's becoming a footnote in imperial archives, preserved as an example for generations to mock. The parade ends near the mosque, where the offender is ordered to climb down. He bows low, soot dripping onto the ground, then vanishes into the alleys. The donkey flicks its tail and brays loudly, as though demanding applause. The crowd disperses, buzzing with gossip. Already stories are growing taller. He cried. One child insists. He begged forgiveness. Another claims. You smile. We're only hours away, and already history is rewriting itself in whispers. As you turn back through the bazaar, you realize the brilliance and cruelty of it all. Punishment here is more than pain. It is narrative. By humiliating one, the emperor writes a cautionary tale for thousands. The donkey plods on, and so does justice, odd, theatrical, unforgettable. The echo of yesterday's donkey parade still hums through the bazaar when you return to the palace gardens, where another kind of punishment waits, bigger, heavier, and far more intimidating. You hear it before you see it, the slow, deliberate rumble of padded feet, the creak of chains, the deep-throated trumpet of an elephant. And there it is, looming like a moving fortress, tusks capped in gleaming metal, eyes surprisingly calm for a creature pressed into the role of executioner and judge. Fact, elephants were not only symbols of Mughal might, they were occasionally used to mete out justice. An emperor might order a criminal thrown underfoot, or more often, have the elephant merely nudge, pin, or terrify the accused into confession. Jahangir, in particular, is said to have used elephants to test courage, sometimes commuting the sentence if the condemned showed remarkable composure. You inch closer, heart hammering at the sight of the beast. A handler sits atop its broad back, tapping commands with a hooked goad. Before it stands a trembling man accused of theft. His hands shake, his knees threaten collapse. The crowd hushes, waiting to see if tonight will end in blood or mercy. A quirky tidbit. Elephants were trained with astonishing precision. Chronicles describe them lifting offenders gently with their trunks, tossing them into the air, or pressing them against the earth without crushing bones. Think of it as the ultimate good cop, bad cop, except here the bad cop weighs 6 tons and has tusks. Imagine being told your fate depends on whether a giant pachyderm is in a playful mood. Historians still argue whether elephants were truly intended for execution or primarily for display. Some accounts claim they crushed skulls on command. Others suggest the emperors preferred the psychological terror, sparing the guilty at the last moment to appear merciful. The evidence is tangled in hyperbole, leaving scholars to puzzle whether the elephant was executioner, scarecrow, or both. You watch as the handler urges the beast forward. It lifts its trunk, trumpets, and steps closer to the thief. The man whimpers, eyes squeezed shut, as the enormous foot hovers above his chest. Gasps ripple through the audience. Then pause. The elephant lowers its foot with calculated slowness, pressing the man flat against the dust without breaking him. The crowd erupts in relieved laughter. Mercy, it seems, has been chosen tonight. One joke bubbles in your head. Imagine going home and explaining to your family, "Yes, I was sentenced, but technically I was just sat on by an elephant." You grin even as the accused stumbles away, covered in dust but very much alive. The emperor, seated on a marble pavilion nearby, raises a jeweled hand. His face remains unreadable, but the message is clear. He controls not only armies and treasuries, but also life, death, and the theater of terror. The elephant, munching calmly on a branch of sugarcane, plays its part as imperial prop, equal parts awe-inspiring and absurd. Children squeal with delight as the elephant sprays dust with its trunk, while courtiers murmur about the emperor's wisdom in sparing life. A poet nearby begins drafting verses on the mercy of the throne, conveniently skipping over the terror that came just before. You lean against a carved railing, catching your breath. The lesson sinks in. Punishment under the Mughals wasn't only about retribution. It was a stage where emperors could show their power, their mercy, and their ability to make even nature itself bow to their will. The donkey made the crowd laugh, but the elephant makes them tremble, and both leave memories that won't fade quickly. As dusk falls, torches flicker in the garden, casting the elephant in molten light. It sways gently, trunk curling in rhythm with the evening breeze, no longer terrifying but strangely serene, and you, still shaken by its presence, realize you've stepped into a world where justice rides on tusks as easily as on parchment. The elephant's shadow still lingers in your mind as you drift back into the palace corridors, where another kind of punishment waits, not crushing or parading, but quietly, cruelly personal. Here in the Mughal court, dignity itself could be docked, shaved, or stripped away with a single order. No broken bones required, just broken pride. Fact, in Mughal society, honor was woven tightly into visible symbols like the beard, turban, and robes. A man's beard signified not only age and respectability, but religious devotion and masculinity. A turban declared rank, dignity, and belonging. To tamper with these symbols was to cut into the very identity of the wearer. That made them perfect tools for imperial discipline. You pass a chamber where 2 officials kneel miserably. Their once proud beards have been shaved clean, their chins shiny and bare under lamplight. The barber's razor lies nearby, still flecked with stubble. Their turbans, once coiled and jeweled, have been untied, tossed into a corner like discarded rope. The punishment is simple, but the sting is deep. To appear before peers stripped of beard and turban was to announce your disgrace without a single word, a quirky tidbit. Records describe nobles punished by being forced to wear women's veils or ridiculous caps after having their turbans removed. One courtwag joked that the veils made the offenders see their shame twice, once in their faces, once in the fabric. Imagine turning up to work only to find your boss has shaved your beard, snatched your tie, and handed you a frilly bonnet. Not exactly a LinkedIn-friendly look. Historians still argue whether shaving punishments were standard practice or reserved for particularly symbolic cases. Some say emperors like Jahangir used them to humble overproud nobles without shedding blood. Others suggest such punishments were rare, exaggerated by chroniclers who loved humiliation tales. The lack of consistency leaves modern scholars debating how widespread this razor-sharp justice really was. You crouch closer, watching the humiliated men shuffle out. Their bare chins catch whispers like magnets. Courtiers smirk, Some cover their mouths to hide laughter. The punishment lingers long after the razor is sheathed. Each step in public is a reminder, each glance a blade. In another corner, a soldier's tunic has been dyed black as punishment. He wears it stiffly, the color declaring shame as loudly as a trumpet. Black garments in this setting are not stylish. They are scarlet letters, visible from across the courtyard. The soldier avoids eye contact, his boots heavy on marble. His crime? Dereliction of duty, whispered the guard beside you. His sentence is to wear disgrace for weeks, a walking reminder that the empire sees everything. One joke slips into your thoughts. Medieval HR department. Instead of suspensions, they just rebrand your wardrobe to say, "I messed up." You picture the ripple effect. A shaved beard means your prayers at the mosque earn sideways glances. A stripped turban means your social rank has slipped overnight. Even your own servants might hesitate, unsure whether to obey. Punishment here doesn't just touch you, it unravels your entire social fabric. You leave the chamber, the air heavy with perfume, but still sharp from the sting of razors. So a poet mutters verses about vanity's fall, while a painter sketches the scene discreetly. Knowing humiliation makes good material for manuscripts. In the Mughal court, even disgrace could be illuminated in gold leaf. As you walk out into the courtyard, the moonlight falls on rows of officials standing tall, turbans gleaming like crowns. Yet your eyes keep drifting back to the image of those two bare chins, gleaming in lamplight. The donkey parades mocked the body. The elephant frightened the soul, but here dignity itself was peeled away, leaving pride naked for all to see. You wander back through the palace gates and into the bustling square outside, where punishment takes on another curious shape, not humiliation, not tusks or razors, but scales and sacks of grain. Tonight, justice is measured quite literally, and you watch as officials drag out a massive balance, its chains creaking as bronze pans swing gently in the evening breeze. Fact: one Mughal punishment required offenders to pay their guilt in weight, sometimes in silver coins, sometimes in sacks of grain, sometimes in spices or cloth. The offender was weighed on one side of the balance, and the equal amount of goods was demanded as fine, often redistributed as charity. Justice here doubled as spectacle and social welfare. You step closer and the scene unfolds. A merchant accused of cheating customers clambers nervously onto the wooden pan. His sandals slip and he grabs the chain for balance. On the opposite pan, sacks of wheat are piled one by one, thudding into place until the scales groan into equilibrium. The crowd murmurs approval. The heavier the man, the more he must pay, and the more the poor will eat tonight. A quirky tidbit. Sometimes emperors themselves performed ritual weighings, not for punishment, but for birthdays or jubilees. Akbar and Jahangir were famously weighed against gold, silver, sugar, even sesame seeds, with the goods distributed to the needy. Imagine your office birthday party, except instead of cake, your boss weighs you against cupcakes and donates the lot to charity. Mughal justice loved symbolic math. Historians still argue whether weighing punishments were truly common or mostly ceremonial. Some sources emphasize charity, suggesting emperors liked the good press. Others point to village records where cheating shopkeepers were literally tipped onto scales. The line between ritual generosity and punitive measurement remains blurry, leaving us to wonder how many guilty men actually squirmed in those pans. You feel the square vibrate with anticipation as the merchant's scale dips lower. More wheat is piled high, spilling slightly onto the ground. A poor woman scoops up stray grains, clutching them as treasure. Children press closer, eyes wide. For them, this punishment is bounty disguised as justice. The merchant grimaces, cheeks flushed. His crime is public, his weight is public, and now his penance feeds the very mouths he cheated. You sense the brilliance, punishment that is both shameful and redemptive, humiliating and generous. Everyone goes home with a story, and some go home with supper. One joke flickers through your head. Talk about body shaming. Imagine being punished because you skipped a few gym days and now owe triple in rice. You glance at the emperor's clerk, scribbling furiously. He notes not only the man's crime, but the exact measure of grain. Tomorrow it will appear in records filed among edicts and chronicles, the weight of guilt preserved for eternity. Perhaps centuries later, scholars will puzzle over whether this was justice or charity theatre. The scales creak as the merchant steps down, lighter in dignity, but equal in measure. The wheat is carried off in baskets, bound for kitchens and mosques, where it will transform into bread, feeding the empire one loaf at a time. Punishment here ripples outward, touching more lives than just the guilty. As torches flare along the square, you breathe in the scent of wheat dust and sweat. The donkey mocked, the elephant terrified, the razor humiliated, but the scales. They remind everyone that in the Mughal world, justice wasn't just about loss. Sometimes it was about balance, measured grain by grain until the universe felt a little less crooked. The square empties slowly, baskets of wheat disappearing into alleyways, and you drift back into the fortress-like walls of the palace. Here punishment takes on an even subtler form. No donkey brays, no elephant trumpets, no grain sacks groaning. Instead, careers collapse in silence. You feel it in the tension of courtiers' shoulders, the way they bow too low, the way their eyes flick nervously toward the throne. Tonight, justice is written in ranks, stipends, and sudden exile. Fact: the Mughal administrative system revolved around the mansabdari, a hierarchy of officers, ranked by numbers that denoted their military and civil responsibilities. A noble might hold a mansab of 2,000, meaning he was expected to maintain that many cavalrymen. Rank wasn't just honor, it was income, authority, and survival. To strip a man of his mansab was to slice away his livelihood and prestige in one stroke. You overhear whispers as a noble, once resplendent in a turban set with pearls, now kneels bareheaded before the emperor. His mansab has been reduced, his income halved. He looks less like a commander and more like a beggar clutching scraps of silk. The courtiers murmur sympathetically, but some hide smiles. One man's fall is another's promotion, a quirky tidbit. Some punishments involved elegant exile. Rather than prison or flogging, an official might be reassigned to some distant frontier, Kandahar, Bengal, or the Deccan. Officially, it was a duty. In reality, it was punishment disguised as responsibility. Imagine being promoted to a freezing office in Siberia or a lonely outpost in the desert. The salary stayed, but the honor was gone and the gossip traveled faster than your caravan. Historians still argue whether such demotions were merciful reforms or ruthless tools of control. Was the emperor pruning corruption or simply trimming rivals? Akbar is praised for fairness, Aurangzeb accused of vengeance, but the evidence is murky. You imagine the truth lies somewhere between, where principle and paranoia share the same inkpot. You stroll into the record room, where clerks scratch at ledgers by lamplight. One writes the emperor's decree, a reduction of rank, a slash of income. Another notes the reassignment of estates, scribbling names as though shifting entire lives were as simple as moving chess pieces. The rustle of paper is quiet, but its weight is immense. The noble rises slowly, face pale, bowing with exaggerated humility. His jewels glitter less brightly tonight, as if aware their owner's star has dimmed. He knows tomorrow his soldiers may desert, his servants may sneer, and his peers may whisper. His punishment has no visible bruise, yet it will leave scars on reputation that never heal. One joke drifts into your mind. Mughal HR didn't fire you. They just shipped you to the edge of the empire with a note saying good luck with the Afghans. You follow him through the corridors as he departs, his entourage smaller than before. The palace guards look past him without bowing. A eunuch whispers that he's bound for Bengal, a humid land where careers go to sweat and sink. His footsteps echo against marble, and you sense he's already half forgotten. The air smells faintly of ink, rosewater, and fear. Punishment tonight is invisible but devastating, a silent guillotine that cuts careers instead of heads. The donkey paraded you, the elephant frightened you, the razor humiliated you, the scales measured you, but the mansab felt erased you. As you slip back into the courtyard, the stars scatter across the sky, cold and distant. Nobles stand straighter, their hands trembling only slightly as they adjust jeweled daggers at their belts. They've just witnessed the empire's quietest but most efficient punishment, the art of making someone disappear without ever drawing blood. The night stretches on, and you follow the shuffle of silk slippers down another marble corridor. This time, punishment gleams not in shaved beards or slashed ranks, but in confiscated glitter, jewels, robes, even living creatures plucked from guilty hands and reassigned as tokens of the emperor's will. You arrive at a small chamber where clerks tally items like treasure keepers at a carnival of shame. Fact: Fines and forfeitures were a common punishment under the Mughals, especially for nobles and officials. Instead of blood or exile, the emperor might simply strip a man of his prized possessions, pearls, war horses, ceremonial robes, and hand them to someone else. It was both penalty and redistribution, a reminder that wealth flowed only at the emperor's pleasure. You lean against a carved column as a trembling courtier lays out his offerings. A ruby the size of a pigeon's egg, its facets catching torchlight. A robe of honor embroidered with saffron and teal threads. A hawk trained for hunting, hooded and restless, all surrendered on a velvet cloth before the emperor's scribe. Each item gleams, but each carries the same silent message. You had, but you disobeyed. Now you have not. A quirky tidbit. Sometimes punishment stripped away not just jewels, but animals. One chronicler notes a noble find his favorite war elephant, forced to watch it march proudly into another man's stable. Imagine losing not just your sports car, but your beloved pet rolled into one, and then seeing your rival parading it past your door the next morning. Historians still argue whether these confiscations served as true bane, deterrents, or as convenient ways to fatten the imperial treasury. Some sources frame them as moral lessons against greed. Others suggest emperors simply enjoyed expanding their jewel chests without dipping into taxes. The line between piety and practicality here is as thin as silk. You watch as another offender, a merchant accused of hoarding grain, stands red-faced while his private stores are carried off. Sacks of rice, amphorae of oil, even bolts of cotton cloth vanish into the empire's coffers. Within days, these goods will reappear as gifts to the loyal or donations to the poor. The emperor transformed from punisher to benefactor in a single sweep. The merchant mutters under his breath, too low for guards to hear. You catch only fragments, curses about rivals, vows of revenge. Yet when he steps out into the corridor, he forces a smile, bowing to the emperor's portrait on the wall. Pride bends slowly, but it bends. One joke curls in your head. Forget mugshots. In the Mughal world, the punishment photo was just your rival wearing your favorite necklace. You linger as clerks seal jewels in lacquered boxes, their reed pens scratching furiously across parchment. One carefully notes, turban cloth with gold thread. Reassigned, another adds, 2 falcons, gifted. The quiet bureaucracy of confiscation feels oddly soothing, almost like inventory management, except each line item represents a life's humiliation. The offender departs, his ankles heavy, his turban plain, his fingers bare. You realize the cruelty lies not just in the loss, but in the visibility. Tomorrow every courtier will notice his missing rings. Every banquet will echo with his absent falcon's cries. He has been stripped not only of wealth, but of narrative power. As you step out into the courtyard, the night air feels cooler, scented faintly with jasmine. Yet you sense the lingering weight of treasures redistributed, wealth turned into moral theatre. The donkey mocked, the elephant frightened, the razor humiliated, the scales balanced, the mansab erased. But confiscation? It plucked dignity jewel by jewel, until all that remained was a hollow sparkle. The night deepens, and you follow the trail of murmurs into a quieter quarter of the city, far from the jeweled courts, past torchlit arches, into mosques and caravanserais, where justice turns oddly civic. Here punishment isn't about shaving beards or seizing falcons, but about putting guilty hands to public service. You pause by a mosque doorway where a man sweeps furiously, his face red with shame, his broom worn thin. Fact, some Mughal punishments required offenders to perform acts of piety or utility, sweeping mosques, repairing roads, digging wells, funding rest houses, sarai, or even copying manuscripts by hand. It turned punishment into penance and penance into civic good. The empire got cleaner streets and more water, while the offender wore humility like a chain. You watch as the man bends low, sweeping dust into neat piles. Every passerby knows his crime, not because of announcements, but because why else would a wealthy merchant be reduced to broom duty? Children giggle, tugging at his robe. A muezzin nods solemnly, as if sweeping sanctifies more than prayer. The punishment bruises pride but polishes marble. A quirky tidbit. Some scholars describe nobles forced to sponsor roadside shelters for travelers after cheating on taxes or insulting a superior. These sarais often bore inscriptions noting the patron's name. Imagine being immortalized on a rest stop plaque that reads, This building, provided by Lord So-and-so, punished for arrogance in court. The shame was permanent, written into stone. Historians still argue whether such civic punishments were common practice or rare experiments by reformist emperors like Akbar. Some chronicles praise them as enlightened. Others dismiss them as idealized anecdotes. Perhaps both are true. Pious gestures for the chronicles, harsh sweeps for everyday offenders. You wander into the caravanserai, where another offender repairs a cracked wall with mud and straw. His jeweled fingers are raw, the paste sticking under his nails. A clerk records every stroke, ensuring no corner is skipped. Travelers pass by, whispering about how the once proud noble now builds walls for strangers. The punishment transforms him into a living lesson in humility. Nearby, a scribe forces a trembling clerk to copy verses from the Quran onto parchment, his hand cramping from endless lines. Each mistake earns a stern look from a supervising qazi. Pages pile up, ink-stained sacred words doubling as punishment record. You picture the man groaning, wishing he had just been fined instead. One joke dances through your thoughts. Imagine committing tax fraud today and being sentenced to repaint every public restroom in town, by hand, with your name on the sign. You step back into the night air, watching the mosque lamps flicker. The punished men bow low as passers-by drop small coins into bowls. Punishment blends with charity, humiliation with usefulness. It feels strangely efficient. The empire's sins converted into civic upgrades. Justice doubled as infrastructure. As the breeze cools, carrying the smell of baked bread from the sarai kitchens, you realize this punishment leaves something enduring. Unlike donkey parades or shaved beards, roads remain, wells endure, manuscripts survive. The offender's shame becomes public benefit. Carved into stone and ink long after names are forgotten, the night seems endless. Yet within the palace walls another kind of justice gleams faintly under torchlight, this time not in parades or scales, but in the golden clang of a chain. You wander into the garden court, where a massive chain studded with bells hangs from a balcony and drops into the courtyard below. The links glimmer in the moonlight, swaying gently as if waiting for a hand to pull. Fact: Emperor Jahangir famously installed the chain of justice outside his palace at Agra. Anyone, from peasant to noble, could tug it to demand the emperor's attention, bypassing officials and scribes. It was meant as a living symbol that justice was always within reach, even if in reality it was carefully managed. You pause as a ragged farmer steps forward, trembling. He seizes the chain and the bells jingle like temple chimes. The sound slices through the courtyard hush. Guards stiffen, courtiers murmur, and scribes scramble for ink. The emperor himself stirs from the balcony, curiosity sparking in his eyes. A quirky tidbit. Some chroniclers claim Jahangir handled these chain petitions with creative flair. An accused thief, for example, might be sentenced to donate grain equal to the weight of the chain itself, or a negligent officer forced to wear a mock chain of iron links around his neck for a week. Imagine walking into work with a giant necklace of shame jangling every time you move. Historians still argue whether the chain was actually used frequently or if it was more a piece of royal propaganda. Some say peasants truly tugged it. Others suspect the stories were staged for chroniclers to record, a glittering bit of theatre to polish Jahangir's reputation as the just king. The debate hangs unresolved, like the chain itself swaying in the breeze. You watch the farmer bow low as Jahangir's vizier listens to his complaint. His voice shakes. A local official has seized his oxen unjustly. The emperor raises an eyebrow, then commands restitution. The guilty official, summoned in haste, arrives panting, his turban crooked. His punishment? To return the oxen and spend a week parading through Agra, carrying yokes on his shoulders while children laugh. Justice, both practical and theatrical. The farmer weeps in gratitude, clutching the chain again as if it were divine. The bells jingle one last time before settling, their faint hum echoing into the night. You feel goosebumps. This wasn't just punishment. It was spectacle bound to ritual metal. One joke tickles your thoughts. Forget customer service hotlines. Jahangir basically invented the medieval complaint department. Except instead of waiting on hold, you just yanked a golden chain until the emperor noticed. You step back into the courtyard, gazing at the chain swaying gently in the torchlight. It is beautiful, impractical, powerful, and faintly absurd, all the things Mughal justice often was. Around you, the courtiers nod solemnly, some hiding smiles at the official's coming humiliation. Tomorrow the streets will buzz with gossip of the oxen, the yokes, and the emperor's clever ruling. The bells jingle faintly in the wind, and you realize this chain is more than decoration. It is theater, it is propaganda, it is mercy wrapped in metal. Above all, it reminds everyone that justice, however odd, is always within reach of a hand bold enough to pull. The bells of Jahangir's chain still echo in your ears as you drift back through the city. Lanterns glowing low along alleys, music spilling faintly from courtyards. Tonight, punishment turns its gaze not toward thieves or corrupt officers, but toward appetites, cups, dice, and indulgences that could pull even nobles into disgrace. You pause near a pavilion where the fragrance of wine lingers, though the cups are being smashed one by one. Fact, although many Mughal emperors publicly condemned drinking and gambling, both vices thrived in private corners of the court. When discovered, offenders faced odd punishments: wine jars smashed in public, dice boards confiscated, and vows of abstinence forced upon trembling lips. Sometimes men were ordered to swear oaths before the court, promising never to touch cup or dice again. You watch as a group of guilty nobles stand, shamefaced. Their gold-inlaid goblets lie shattered at their feet, wine soaking into the marble like blood. A guard tosses carved ivory dice into a brazier, flames swallowing them in sparks. The air smells of smoke, spice, and sour grapes. The men lower their heads as courtiers snicker. A quirky tidbit. Chroniclers note that some offenders were forced to host sober feasts for the poor as penance. Imagine being caught at a poker table and sentenced to throw a giant lemonade party for the neighborhood, banners proclaiming your repentance, humiliation mixed with generosity, a Mughal favorite formula. Historians still argue whether these punishments were more about genuine morality or imperial image. Some say emperors like Aurangzeb sincerely wanted to stamp out vice. Others argue the bans were half-hearted, flaring up when scandal threatened royal dignity. The dice may have burned, but were they replaced by another set tomorrow? No one agrees. The nobles now step forward, each clasping hands in prayer-like fashion. One by one, they recite vows of abstinence before the emperor's vizier. The words tremble, some spoken earnestly, others muttered through clenched teeth. The crowd leans in, savoring every syllable. These oaths are theater, and everyone knows it. The true test will be the next festival night. One joke bubbles up. Imagine if modern punishments required you to stand in court and solemnly swear, "I will never binge-watch past midnight again." You grin, picturing nobles making pinky promises under torchlight. The emperor himself appears, robes shimmering in saffron and indigo. He raises his hand, declaring that those who break their vows will face harsher shame next time, perhaps a donkey ride or a week sweeping mosque courtyards. The crowd gasps, laughs, and disperses, the lesson sinking in. The offenders bow deeply, their faces tight with humiliation. They shuffle away, turbans askew, pride wounded more deeply than their livers. Behind them, servants sweep shards of goblets into baskets, their steps echoing against marble. As you step into the cooler night air, the breeze carries both relief and irony. Justice here tastes not of blood or sweat, but of sour wine and broken dice. The donkey mocked, the elephant terrified, the razor humiliated, the scales balanced, the mansab erased, the jewels stripped, the broom humbled, the chain jingled. But tonight, the cup and dice remind everyone that appetites themselves can be punished, emptied, and smashed into lessons. The scent of burnt wine still hangs faintly in the night air as you slip into another wing of the palace, this one alive with brushstrokes, inkpots, and scraps of verse. Here punishment bends in a new direction, away from donkeys and dice toward artistry itself. You pause at the doorway of the imperial atelier, where scribes and painters hunch over desks, their faces weary not from inspiration but from obligation. Fact, in the Mughal court, artists, poets, and chroniclers could be punished by being ordered to produce apologies in their own medium. A poet who offended with satire might be commanded to write glowing panegyrics. A painter who displeased the emperor could be made to illuminate manuscripts of dry legal codes instead of courtly romances. Creativity became penance, ink turned into chains. You walk closer and the scene unfolds. One poet, eyes red from sleeplessness, mutters rhymes under his breath. His punishment? To compose an epic praising the very noble he once mocked in verse. Every line drips with forced flattery, each metaphor stretched thin. He scrawls quickly, as if by sheer speed he might escape humiliation. The courtiers who read it later will smirk knowingly, justice disguised as poetry. A quirky tidbit. Chroniclers mention painters forced to redo portraits of nobles they had made too honest. Imagine sketching wrinkles faithfully, only to be sentenced to repaint the same man glowing with youth, jewels, and improbable muscles. Some even claim offenders had to illustrate their own punishments in miniature, like medieval mugshots painted in gold leaf. Historians still argue whether these artistic punishments were widespread or isolated anecdotes. Some suggest they reveal the court's obsession with appearances, every slip in flattery corrected with brush or verse. Others dismiss them as embellishments by chroniclers who enjoyed stories where art and shame entwined. The truth, like smudged ink, is hard to pin down. You peer over the shoulder of a painter, tasked with illuminating a manuscript. His hands tremble, the brush heavy with lapis and shell gold. But instead of scenes of gardens and lovers, he paints stern judges, scales, and legal decrees. The brilliance of his art is wasted on dreary law, punishment disguised as duty. His sighs are louder than the scratch of his brush. Nearby, a young calligrapher is forced to copy edicts hundreds of times, each repetition an echo of his supposed arrogance. His wrist cramps, his eyes blur, yet he dares not falter. The Qazi supervising him watches hawk-like, ready to pounce on smudges. The calligrapher mutters under his breath, though the words dissolve into the ink. One joke whispers through your mind. Imagine being grounded not by losing your phone, but by being told to handwrite the entire user manual 3 times. In your best cursive, you sink onto a cushion watching the weary artists at work. Their punishment is subtle but sharp. Their talent, once a source of pride, is now chained to tasks designed to humble. Instead of painting emperors as radiant, they must paint donkeys with soot-faced riders. Instead of poems sung at feasts, they must write odes to humility. The room glows with lamplight reflecting off gold leaf, but the atmosphere is heavy. Brushes move like shackles, pens scratch like whips. Punishment tonight is art turned sour, every stroke a reminder that the emperor controls not only bodies, wealth and careers, but also imagination itself. As you step out into the corridor, the cool night air feels strangely freeing after the suffocating ink and pigment. You realize that even creativity could be commandeered as punishment. Brilliance bent until it bowed. The donkey mocked, the elephant terrified, the razor humiliated, the scales balanced, the mansab erased, the jewels stripped, the broom humbled, the chain jingled, the goblet smashed. But tonight, the poet's pen and the painter's brush prove that even imagination could be shackled into justice. The echo of scratching pens and weary brushes fades behind you as you slip into another corner of the palace. A quieter, veiled world where justice is whispered, not shouted. Tonight you find yourself in the women's quarters, the harem where punishment exists but rarely parades in streets or rings bells. Here it arrives in soft footsteps, discreet words, and the sudden return of a costly gift. Fact: the Mughal harem was not merely a household of wives and concubines, it was a political and cultural hub. Women here wielded influence, wealth, and sharp tongues. But when discipline was required, it was delivered differently from the bazaar's donkey rides or the garden's elephants. Fines, confiscations, loss of privileges, or gentle confinement often served as the instruments of order. You watch as a noblewoman sits stiffly on a low cushion, her silks of indigo and saffron muted by the absence of jewelry. Moments ago, she was ordered to return a necklace given by the emperor, a public symbol of favor. Its sudden absence now gleams brighter than any gem, a reminder to all that her star has dimmed. Other women glance at her wrists, whispering, hiding half smiles behind henna'd hands. A quirky tidbit. Some records suggest women in the harem could be sentenced to compose verses of apology, much like poets in the atelier. Imagine being told to rhyme your regret for spilling secrets or mocking a rival. Others were quietly reassigned to distant palaces, exiled not to deserts but to suffocating obscurity. Historians still argue whether harem punishments were harsher than chronicles admit or deliberately softened in record. Some suspect political rivalries made them severe, with women locked away for months. Others believe confinement was more symbolic, a cooling-off period in a gilded cage. The truth remains veiled, much like the chambers themselves. You drift deeper into the quarters, noticing a servant girl standing alone in a corner. Her punishment? To serve without jewels or perfumes for a month. It seems minor, yet here, where appearance is half one's identity, it stings deeply. She lowers her gaze, moving silently past trays of rose sherbet and piles of embroidered cushions. Nearby, another woman is gently escorted to a small chamber. It is richly decorated, with painted ceilings and velvet curtains, but the lock on the door clicks with quiet finality. Her confinement may last days or weeks. No donkeys or elephants involved, just silence, separation, and shame carried behind closed doors. One joke flits across your mind. Imagine being grounded in the Mughal harem, not losing your phone, but losing your perfume cabinet for a month. You smile. Though the subdued faces around you remind you that here, small losses echo loudly. The air smells of sandalwood and rosewater, yet tension lingers like incense smoke. Justice in the harem is softer, quieter but no less pointed. Gifts withdrawn, jewels reclaimed, whispers sharpened into knives. The donkey mocked, the elephant terrified, the racer humiliated, the scales balanced, the mansab erased, the jewels stripped, the broom humbled, the chain jingled, the goblet smashed, the pen enslaved. But here, the women's quarters disciplined through silence, through absence, through the heavy weight of what is suddenly missing. You slip back into the night air, stars scattered above like spilled gems. The courtyard feels louder after the hush of the harem, but the lesson lingers. Justice doesn't always roar, it sometimes whispers, and the whisper cuts deepest of all. You step away from the hushed harem corridors into the wide courtyards where torches blaze and drums thunder. Tonight justice takes on a brighter face, dressed in silks and scattered with coins. Because sometimes, punishment in the Mughal world wasn't about humiliation or exile at all. It was about reversal, mercy, and the strange alchemy of turning disgrace into generosity during festivals. Fact, on great occasions, Eid, Nowruz or imperial birthdays, emperors often proclaimed general pardons or lightened punishments. Debtors were freed, fines were remitted, and offenders were ordered to distribute alms instead of enduring harsher penalties. The spectacle of mercy reinforced imperial magnificence as surely as the spectacle of severity. You drift among the crowd as lanterns sway overhead. A man who only days ago swept mosque floors for cheating customers now stands handing out trays of sweetmeats. Children press close, their fingers sticky with syrup, their eyes wide at the sudden transformation. The crowd laughs kindly. Last week he was shame. Tonight he is benefactor. A quirky tidbit. Some records describe nobles condemned for arrogance being pardoned during Nowruz, but only after showering gold coins from balconies into the throng. Imagine being forced to make it rain in rupees as the price of forgiveness. One poet even wrote that pardons fell like coins from the emperor's hand, blurring mercy and spectacle into one shining gesture. Historians still argue whether these pardons were truly acts of mercy or carefully staged political theatre. Did the emperors soften genuinely, or did they know mercy made for better headlines than cruelty during festivals? Chroniclers disagree, and you suspect both are true. Compassion and calculation dancing together like firelight on silk. You watch as another offender, once paraded backward on a donkey, now distributes bundles of grain to the poor. His face is still red with remembered shame, but each bundle given eases his burden. The emperor watches from a balcony, his turban glittering with shell gold, basking in the double glow of power and magnanimity. One joke hums in your head. It's like Mughal Black Friday, except instead of discounts, disgraced nobles are handing you free wheat. The square fills with music. Drummers pound rhythms, dancers whirl in saffron skirts, and fire eaters send sparks into the dark sky. Offenders mingle awkwardly among revelers, their punishments transformed into service. The donkey mocked, the elephant terrified, the racer humiliated, the scales balanced, the mansab erased, the jewels stripped, the broom humbled, the chain jingled, the goblet smashed, the pen enslaved. The harem hushed. But tonight mercy itself is the oddest punishment, forcing men to turn humiliation into almsgiving. You breathe in the mingled scents of rose sherbet, cardamom and smoke. The music softens, coins clink into outstretched palms, and the crowd disperses, warmed not just by fire but by the sense that justice can wear a smile as well as a scowl. The festival torches flicker out one by one, and you find yourself walking alone beneath the shadow of the great palace walls. The night feels quieter now, as if the city itself exhales after the laughter, the music, and the long parade of odd punishments. You pause beneath a neem tree, listening to the rustle of leaves, and realize your journey is nearly at its end. What lingers are not just the spectacles, the donkey, the elephant, the chain of bells, but the stories they left behind. Fact: many Mughal punishments survive in chronicles, court records, and travelers' tales. Yet what you've seen tonight, the humiliation, the mercy, the theatrical flair, has always been half history, half legend. For every detailed record, there is a rumor embroidered into gossip. And for every sober decree, there is a miniature painting that turns justice into gold leaf theatre. A quirky tidbit: European travelers often exaggerated Mughal punishments for their own audiences. One Portuguese merchant insisted elephants trampled men weekly, while a Jesuit visitor swore that every donkey parade ended in riotous laughter. Some may have been telling the truth, others spinning tales for patrons back home. Odd punishments became curiosities to carry across oceans, souvenirs made of words. Historians still argue how much of this justice was real, how much was performance, and how much was myth. Did emperors truly rely on humiliation more than pain? Were civic tasks genuine reform or just propaganda? Was the famous chain of justice ever tugged by real peasants or only by scribes polishing Jahangir's reputation? The debates stretch on unresolved, as if the empire itself still whispers riddles through the dust. You sit quietly recalling each scene. The donkey marking pride, the elephant pressing fear, the razor shaving dignity, the scales balancing guilt, the mansab stripped like silk unraveling, the jewels seized, the broom wielded, the chain jingling, the goblet smashed, the poets shackled with pens, the harem hushed, the festivals forgiving. Each punishment was odd, yes, but each carried the same message. The emperor ruled not just with sword or coin, but with imagination. One final joke stirs: if justice is blind, in the Mughal court it was at least very stylish, decked in pearls, draped in indigo, and occasionally riding a donkey backward. You lean back, staring at the stars above the palace domes. The breeze carries faint traces of rosewater and smoke, the sense of power and spectacle fading into memory. You realize that what kept the empire together wasn't only armies or taxes. It was these public rituals, half discipline, half drama, that etched authority into every heart. And though centuries have passed, the odd punishments of the Mughal emperors still shimmer like stories told by firelight, equal parts history and dream. And now, the palace grows silent. The torches burn low, the marble cools under the touch of night, and the echoes of laughter and fear sink slowly into quiet stone. You feel your own steps softening, no longer trudging but drifting, as though the weight of donkeys, elephants, razors, and scales has lifted. What remains is only the stillness of the courtyard, the faint jingle of a chain swaying in the breeze, and the sense that all stories must eventually settle like dust. The punishments you've witnessed, so odd, so theatrical, fade into whispers. They dissolve into memory, leaving only lessons: that pride can be shaved, that wealth can be plucked like a jewel, that mercy can arrive disguised as a festival coin. Each punishment was loud, but the night now invites you to let them all fall silent, to set them down one by one until nothing is left but calm. You breathe deeper. The air feels softer now, cooler, wrapping gently around your shoulders. The marble beneath you no longer feels cold but steady, a foundation holding you safe as the stories slip away. Above, the stars scatter like tiny gilded dots in a miniature painting, serene, eternal, unblinking. Let your mind drift with them. Imagine the donkey quietly grazing, the elephant asleep, the chain still, the poet's inkpots capped, the festival drums packed away. All is at rest, and you too can rest now. Close your eyes. Let the night cradle you, as it once cradled emperors and peasants alike. Justice has played its strange, shimmering pageant, and the stage is dark once more. You are safe, you are calm, and the world is quiet.